you're very welcome to Galway Theatre Festival's opening event. My name is Sarah Keane. I'm the Festival Director of the Galway Theatre Festival. And after such a strange and unusual year, we're delighted to be launching a festival of any kind. And especially that we're bringing a range of events suitable for both audiences and artists to those who have been long-time supporters of Galway Theatre Festival, but also those who are new to Galway Theatre Festival. A lot of imagining and reimagining has gone into making this festival happen at all, and so I'm going to take this opportunity at our opening event to welcome and thank some of those people, some of whom are here and are watching. So for starters, I'd like to thank our funders, the Arts Council, Galway City Council and First Magalga, our venue partners, and yes, we did manage to get into some venues this year, which was the Town Hall Theatre, the Mick Lally Theatre and the O'Donoghue Centre in NUI Galway. We had videographers, Morgan Creative, designers, Lara Luxardi, and web designers, Jeremy Sear Cook, who've done a huge amount of work in making the festival look the way it does, which obviously, particularly these days on Zoom and on YouTube, etc., is very important. I'd like to thank the Galway Theatre Festival Board of Directors for their continued support. And very importantly, I'd like to thank my team, our festival team, the General Manager, Aoife Noon, our Marketing Manager, Jane Hanbury, our Production Manager, Ciara O'Donnell, and our two fantastic interns, Noel Minogue and Laura Brincat. So the festival team have done a huge amount of work. Our work is not yet finished, and part of that is digital ushering, a term we've coined for those magic people who'll be minding the waiting room and the mute button in all of our Zoom events. So you'll see our GTF team throughout the festival on the various Zooms over the next 9 days. There are still tickets for a lot of the events. A couple of events are sold out, but there are tickets to most things going at the moment. So be sure to check out the programme on galwaytheatrefestival.com, and you'll hear more about the programme through this event. So before we kick off the event properly, I'm going to do a little bit of the housekeeping. So as this is a webinar, our attendees are automatically muted and you will only see the panelists' videos. We will hear from the panelists first, and then there'll be a Q&A towards the end of the event. This event will be approximately 60 minutes, 55 to 60 minutes. If you'd like to ask a question to any of our panelists specifically, or a general question, you can do so by typing your name into the chat box. We'll call on you then, and you can unmute yourself and ask your question to whomever you'd like to ask. And importantly, remember to mute yourselves again. We are recording this, which is kind of both for our own archives and for posterity, but we'll also be putting it up on YouTube. So for GDPR purposes, we will edit it before we get to the questions, just in case anybody doesn't want to be up on YouTube. And so we'll move swiftly along to the reason you're all here. So this event, while it's the opening event of the festival, it's also part of a project that has been ongoing for a number of months. 3 festival dramaturgs, Sarah Hoover, Claire Mullane and Marina Dhubhain, have been working with the artists programmed in the festival and some who are not programmed in the festival to help them develop their work. The festival dramaturgs themselves have been receiving mentorship from 3 fantastic mentors, Pamela McQueen, Davey, Kelleher and Maisie Lee, who was not able to join us today, unfortunately. And stewarding the whole project is Gavin Kostick, from Literary Manager with Fishamble. If, and I'm sure there are some people in the audience going, what is dramaturgy? What is this word? I don't understand it. Don't worry, that's what we are here to demystify today. And hopefully by the end of this, not only will you have a better idea of what dramaturgy is, but you'll also be excited about some of the events that are happening in the festival and be encouraged to come and join us to more of the events that are happening over the next 9 days. So That's enough for me, I think. I'm going to move us to gallery view now, so you'll be able to see our panelists, our festival dramaturgs, our mentor dramaturgs, and Gavin Kostick from Fishamble. And hello, everybody. You're all very welcome. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to start by going straight over to Gavin as our steward of this project. Yeah. Gavin, I suppose the big question, I guess, is what is dramaturgy? Yeah. And why?
Sure. So thanks, Orca, and it's great to be here. Here for me is in the Fishamble Blue Room, which we're back into now. I'm pleased to say I'm here on my own. And here is also the Galway Theatre Festival. It's absolutely great to be part of this development. I am the literary manager of Fishamble. So during the interminable lockdown, I've been playing endless games of Scrabble with my mother and my brother, because it turned out to be far too tiring to phone my mother every 3 days ago. Are you all right? So I'm all right. You know, so we thought if we played Scrabble endlessly, I would always know she was all right. Her brain was still working and she wins all the time. So before tonight, I put the word dramaturgy into the Scrabble dictionary to see what pops up. And that dictionary contains a lot of words that you don't think exist. And it exists in some dictionaries and not in others. So it's still a word that hasn't quite found its place in the English language, even amongst the world of words. I'll just lay a few cards on the table for terrain, and then please ask questions. Other people here on the panel will absolutely know need more than I do. The word is German. It probably comes from a man called Lessing in the 18th century, who's kind of an Enlightenment sort of figure. Turg means work, so it's drama works. And it's some kind of idea of a person who knows something about the structure and ideas and processes of playmaking, in addition to or beyond being a playwright, or as well as separately as being a playwright. So it's the idea of drama works, how does drama work? That's the word. In practice, there have always been people, in practice, they're generally given as two kinds. There are dramaturgs who work with productions of pre-existing things like ballets, operas, plays by Shakespeare, so on. And they might work with the director in order to work on a production, a successful contemporary production, a reworking perhaps of classic material. Then there are new play dramaturgs, and of course, some dramaturgs do both, who work with playwrights, actors, other theatre makers of all kinds to help them develop and deliver the best play they possibly can. And within the world of Fishamble, I suppose that's more what I've been all these years. And of course, that's all existed for a long time. People have always worked with playwrights to help them develop plays. So I would have been doing that before the word came in even to the Irish lexicon. I think in terms of training, and again, Irish theatre history is not great for its, Irish theatre is contemporary theatre. It's not great for its history. There's not a great record of who did what when. But I would say, for example, the first trained dramaturg who used the term dramaturg and was a dramaturg is Hannah Schlatner in Belfast with Tinderbox there. So that would be the beginnings of dramaturgy as a discussable form. And of course, it's moved into the academic zone as well. So really, it's working with all kinds of theatre makers to help the play achieve the best play it can be for audiences across a number of ways. The one anecdote I'll leave it with is I once asked the great Veronica Coburn when she thought a play was complete. And Veronica, who is absolutely central in terms of work, in terms of physical theatre, development of physical theatre in Ireland, and in terms of youth theatre, a really, really important figure. She's great. She said, well, she thought the thing was with a play or production that you should be able to poke it from any direction and it won't wobble. So to some extent, I've always thought the job of the dramaturg is to sit in with something and mentally you're poking it from different directions and seeing if it wobbles, and you're helping everyone involved to address it so that when it finally reaches the public, you can poke it any way you like and the work doesn't wobble. So that's what I think a dramaturg does. There you go.
Thanks very much, Gavin. So really dramaturgy and playmaking is like a very large scale game of Jenga. Poke it and it wobbles, but you add in a dramaturg and hopefully the Jenga tower will hold firm.
Yeah, and we all work to do our best. So you just trying to really. So another way of looking at it is quite simply as well as being the first audience of the play. So in other words, often in the play reading, sometimes you fight the idea to have too much to say too quickly, too many ideas. So you might be in a reading and you just sit there and you listen to what the play wants to be, what the playwright thinks it wants to be, the way it comes to life in the room. And so you're listening, and then you go, oh, and you catch your thoughts, and then you just start to see if you can work to find helpful thoughts for everyone involved. But it is also not unlike, I am told, man management in the Premier League. The manager is faced with a load of footballers who are playing football. They're all playing football, and what you're watching is a game of football. But all the players are different, and they all respond to different prompts, decisions. There, some technical excellences, something they don't like to mention, they're not good at. Some are reaching the end of the career, the beginning of the career. So they're all different. So you have to both manage the game where the team plays, but you also have to keep an eye on everyone individually. So all players are different. Again, in terms of anecdotes, I was talking to the great Paul Mercer. I've got two greats in already this evening from Galway. He was talking to me from Galway about a play. When someone like that, who's absolutely central to Irish theatre, contemporary Irish theatre development, really good plays like Brown Bread and Budlier would be him. So Paul Mercer, really great. He said, he was working on a play, he was very vague, very drifty. He was like, it's about this, I'm not sure. I think it's a male two-hander. And he, okay, what is it, Paul? What is it? He goes, yeah, I'm trying to work out the terms of engagement with the audience. I'm trying to work out the terms of engagement with the audience. And I like that. So that's another thing you'd be thinking about. How does this engage with the audience? And to just have a little vision of that, and then you work with them.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Gavin. And one of the things that I'm very excited about in the festival program is the masterclasses that you're going to be hosting later on in the week. I have my ticket booked, and I'm really excited to explore the scripts of those three plays with you.
Great. Yeah, I really look forward to that. And you can probably tell a bit that people work in different ways, and the work that I do is very pragmatic. It's project to project. So when you ask what is dramaturgy, it's much easier to talk about specific projects. Well, and this it was this, and this it was this. So I really look forward to getting stuck into 3 plays, all produced in the last few years, really nice contemporary work. And then we can really get tucked in and people ask questions, you know?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Gavin. I'm now going to talk to our great mentor dramaturgs, Davey, Keller and Pamela McQueen. I might start with you, Davey. I suppose we've heard from Gavin about dramaturgy and what dramaturgy is. I'd be really interested to hear from you about how you use it in your practice and why you see it as being important in your own practice.
Oh, sure. Well, I think it's really interesting what Gavin mentioned about the differences between different types of dramaturgy depending on the project that you're working on. So I think it's almost like I see it like a sort of a set of tools that you can employ at different points. Like, you know, those kind of Crayola box sets you used to get when you were a kid that has oil paint and then crayons and then pencils, and certain projects need different things. So I guess to give a little context from my work, I come from a production background. I work as a theatre director predominantly. And so dramaturgy as a tool in my own practice, and then as a dramaturg, is about, I would totally agree with what Gavin had said about poking the piece from different angles. I think it's about asking provocative questions. And I think the role of the dramaturg gets to be one of the more objective voices in the room. I think very often there's a level of investment, creative investment on a project. If you're the playwright, you're extremely close to it. If you're one of the designers, if you're an actor, you're very close to your discipline and how your discipline is engaging with the piece. And I think dramaturgy provides an objectivity that is a step removed, where you get to look at all those, as Gavin put it, all those players and how they speak to one another. So I guess for me, it would be about asking provocative questions of every language that is at play within a particular production. So how do these things interact? Because I always think of a play as being a script, as being a blueprint for a production. That predominantly drama, theatre, is to be performed and to be experienced. And it's about a contract between a performance that's happening and an audience that's watching it. So it has to exist in this sort of this shared space that can only exist with these two sides, that it's going to happen. That there's a sort of social contract of agreement that this event is going to happen. And so how are the languages that are at play in that interaction read? How are they interpreted? Ultimately, this is going to be a three-dimensional experience. So what's on the page, what's not on the page? And I guess it's about asking as many questions that are provocative and apposite as possible. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it could be a difficult thing to ask a question that everyone in the room doesn't want you to ask, because it'll make the play wobble. Do you know what I mean? But I think it's a really valuable objective voice. And sometimes, like, it depends where you are in the duration of a process. If you're early on in development, if you're just working with a writer, sometimes it's you feel a little like a therapist, you know, that you're trying to tease something out. And I think, again, speaking back to that objectivity thing, you don't want to impose your own creative ideas. You're not there as a maker. You are there as a facilitator of someone else's creativity in a way. Or that's how I feel. And so it's about asking teasing questions that might help someone else contextualize their work at a particular point in a particular process. And so in terms of that context, you might ask questions to define what the dramatic context is. You might be looking at what the social context that the piece is being made in, what's the cultural context, where is it going to play, how is an audience going to meet it, where does it sit in the canon of work that is similar, how is it going to be read, how is it going to be interpreted, what's the formal context, what sort of shape does the piece take, what languages are at play within it, verbal, non-verbal, design languages, and it's about, for me, asking those questions and sort of troubleshooting it and encouraging the makers to consider it in terms of the duration of a piece, like that it will develop, and eventually this is going to be something that's experienced. And sometimes, and you kind of have to temper when you're asking these questions. You don't want to scare someone off of writing something, because they don't have to, don't put too many restrictions on someone, like, well, who's it for, where are you going to play it, and how's it going to sit. Sometimes you hold back certain questions for later in the process when they're able to be met, when they're able to be asked.
And do you find, I was struck by that idea of asking a question that people don't want to be asked. Do you find that sometimes there's a question that people know needs to be asked, but have been maybe avoiding it? Or
oh my God, I think so. I think you'll ask a question and they'll be like, oh, I know, I have to work that thing out. And so, but sometimes it's always, I think, with a really open spirit that you engage creatively with other people. And I think it's really important as well, just speaking practically, to set expectations and I think it's something that particularly within the field of dramaturgy, what kind of dramaturg does this project need? So what is the nature of that relationship? And actually, I think that comes down to those within the context of that partnership, is defining the terms of the engagement. So what is it that this piece needs, and is this artist, do we agree that we need that this relationship is to provide such and such a form of, what's the word, a springboard? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's no good coming in and because also it's incredibly personal work as well. Sometimes you're working with people who have projects that are very close to their heart or very deeply personal. And sometimes, and that's where you might end up asking questions that someone doesn't really want to answer, or feels like, oh no, where you say, if something is based on reality, or based on their own experience and they've written it, and you say, why is this moment dramatically relevant in the telling of this story? And the answer might be, well, that's how it happened. And you think, well, then then it begs the question as to whether or not, is this a narrative piece? Is this a strictly factual verbatim piece? How important is that accuracy? And you think, oh, I just wanted to put that in. Or people fall in love with a particular turn of phrase or a monologue, and you think, oh, what is this serving? in the context of the piece, and they might go, oh, I know, I just love the sound of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's about, but again, it's about being, I think, open and generous, and having I think the other thing is that if you're working with a writer, particularly, like, you're not writing the play for them or with them. So I think you have to give permission for disagreement there as well. I always say, like, these are provocations, these are offerings. You are totally within your rights to say, I disagree with you. And sometimes that can be really valuable. You say, well, this is how this comes across. So is that how you want it to come across? Because you're, as Gavin said, you're offering an audience perspective, but also you're only one audience. So, you know, there's fallibility there as well, you know.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. Thank you, Davey. Really, really interesting stuff there. One of the things that struck me, and maybe Pamela, you could speak to this from what both Davey and Gavin have been talking about, is the curiosity that seems to be involved, or is almost a prerequisite to be a dramaturg. What's what would your opinion on that be?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think definitely, like, because you work on so many different types and forms of theatre and productions. Do you know what I mean? There's no kind of one type of theatre, you know, and there's also no one type of story. So yeah, I mean, but that's part of the fun of the job, actually, is that, like, you know, one day you can be working on like a political play about, you know, activism around a particular issue that might be, you know, based in Ireland. And the next you can be in a fantasy space about the 15th century medieval world. Do you know what I mean? So like, I think that side of it is an absolute joy in practice, actually, do you know?
And how do you prepare when you're working on two projects that could be so vastly different? Obviously, a lot of it requires, you know, each piece needs what it needs. But do you have kind of go-to tools in your dramaturgy arsenal that you would rely on a regular basis?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, each project, I think somebody said this already, has to be responded to differently. So I sort of have this idea that I work with people about kind of what's the iteration points. How do you come to the piece of work yourself as a maker, as a creator, as an artist? And what's your intentions behind the work? And those intentions of, like, things like the storytelling and the narrative, but also the intentions about the theatre, the type of theatre you want to actually make, you know, the form of theatre. And that's where that conversation about your relationship to the audience and what you want to do to your audience, you know, do you want to move them or terrify or thrill or whatever it is you want, how you want that interaction to go. And then I kind of use that then continually throughout the process, because that's what we go back to, because, you know, it shifts, it changes. It's the nature of the creative project, you know, so you might go through 8 drafts of something. And so it can look very different at the end from the beginning. So you go back a lot to those iterative points, those intentions, and kind of check back in with, is this where we wanted to go? And if we're a mile, you know, if we're a mile wide of where we wanted to go, are we all okay with that? That we're actually, you know, doing a 180 with this project and all heading in that different direction, you know? So it means that there's nothing unconsidered in the decision-making process is the ideal place you kind of want to be in as you progress across it.
Yeah, that's I have to say I'm really kind of excited about and delighted for the audience here, but for myself as well, to get this insight. And it's really given me an insight into how the conversations that have been happening between Festival Dramaturg and Mentor Dramaturg. I suppose, Pamela, another question I have for you is, I suppose, to not ignore the situation we found ourselves in over the past 12 or 13 months. Have you been able to practice as a dramaturg in that time, and what has the impact of, like, not being in the room been on?
Yeah, it's what a time it's been, eh? Yeah, so I've been busier than ever, because of course we haven't really been able to produce. So what have we been able to do? We've been able to kind of develop work for the stage as such, and then artists have been able to develop themselves and their own skill set. So in a sense, something that maybe we haven't touched on is that there's different sort of stages to your dramaturgy practice. So, I mean, I would talk about sort of generative work, development work, and then production dramaturgy. And even in terms of when we're talking about a new play being developed. So the generative stage is very much the ideas. So it's the kind of dramaturgy work you might hear people talking about, maybe a little bit more in Europe and on the continent, where people like a dramaturg would be a researcher on a project. So, you know, when we're talking about, when I mentioned a play like about a social issue, you know, so I could spend time, you know, just recently, it was, you know, it was a lot about, say, Magdalen laundries and the history of that lived experience. So like I can end up in things like military archives. I can end up in like county records, newspaper records, you know, I can end up in all sorts of places doing research when you're right back in that kind of generation of ideas. And then that's kind of narrative story ideas, but also then you're talking about like ideas around form, theatrical expression. So some of the work I was doing like was mentorship actually over the lockdown period with playwrights who wanted to shift form. They'd maybe always written in naturalism, but actually they wanted to move into site-specific or immersive theatre. So we did a whole piece of work around what it is to write for that theatre. What are the dramaturgy principles involved in writing for that form, which can be quite different, say, to take that example, site-specific and immersive compared to naturalism, front end, stage on, you know, stage on proscenium arch theatre. So like that was some of the work I was doing. And then also just going into that, developing drafts of a work, you know, and we were doing that thing, I think Davey mentioned doing some work on Zoom earlier, where you have actors on Zoom doing that very first test run, you know, when you just hear the voices with the words for the very first time, which is an exhilarating and terrifying moment for any writer, of course, which is, you can kind of do that stage on Zoom. The frustration of not being able to be bodies in a room together and, you know, develop that dramaturgy, the actual performance dramaturgy of the work, the look at how it moves and walks and talks in the 3D space. That obviously couldn't happen currently, which was, you know, holding things back somewhat. But so people were working on pieces, getting them up to that stage almost, you know, and hopefully we'll be back in workshop rooms very soon.
Well, hopefully, and we might have a huge flourishing and burgeoning of all these pieces that have been developing and kind of cooking behind the scenes, ready to hit the ground running in the kind of physical development stage, hopefully. Thank you for that, Pamela. I think now is the time to maybe bring on our festival dramaturgs. So we have Sarah Hoover, Claire Mullane and Marina Dhubhain, and I think we might have all three of you together.
Cool.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. As I said, I'm really enjoying getting an insight into the conversations you might have been having over the past while with your mentors. I suppose, you know, what I'd really love to hear from you is a couple of things. First of all, how you found the project, maybe what you've enjoyed or something that you've learned from it. And then I think we might put you to the test to come up with a highlight from the festival program that you would recommend for people to check out. So because of where you were situated on our screens, we might start with you, Sarah, please.
Sure. So first question then was
how you found the project.
How we found the project. Oh,
which is ongoing, I know, but
yes,
the project to date. Yeah.
It is. Well, and I was thinking when you were kind of asking us like what learning we're pulling from this. So I teach dramaturgy at NUI Galway, but my own research focus and performance making focus is on embodied and participatory theater. So thinking through the way that the body moves in space and feels, effective dramaturgy or effective research and the audience, which means that my dramaturgy needed dramaturged. Like I really needed to think about when in the process, kind of like what Pamela was saying, when in the process do the authors or performance makers need to hear different things or need to be presented with different kinds of research packs or graphical maps or image collages or workshop exercises. Like, don't just dump everything on them because you're so excited because their project is amazing. But think about the structure of the conversation. So that's been great. Davey's been a real help in checking my process to see that I am providing useful information.
Good. Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I can imagine being in the room with a project and wanting, you know, having all of this feedback and all of these ideas, and like what Davey was saying, having to check your own kind of role, because you're not the author, you're not the director, you have a very different position in the room, and also maybe, as you say, holding back on giving everything all at once so as not to scare somebody off or overwhelm. And from your work, and I know you're probably biased towards the people you've been working with, but what would you recommend to our audience members to check out over the next couple of days?
Oh, yeah, I am a little biased, of course. And some of the things that have been highlighted peripherally as part of GTF, I've already been like watching Mustard and Boland and all those things. So it's nice to see those advertised, like cross-marketed. Those are great. But if I had to pick one thing, I'd really say the most important piece is one that I'm working with, and that's The Common Good from Eileen Gibbons, because she's really excavating something about Irish culture that is related to Article 41.2 in the Constitution, the woman's place enshrined in the home without real support, right? So it's so timely, since the Citizens Assembly has basically put it on the table. We got to have a referendum about this. It's so important. And she's really, God, that woman's amazing. She just drills down to the heart of it.
Great.
So I recommend that.
Excellent. So The Common Good is Sarah Hoover's top recommendation for the festival. No doubt if we gave you more time, you'd have many more, but I'm not giving him more time. So we're going to move swiftly on to Marina and Dhubhain. Marina, tell us a little bit about your experience of the project so far.
Oh, my experience has been very, very positive. I suppose my background a lot is in teaching playwriting, and I was kind of navigating where the teaching playwriting and the dramaturgy kind of where they meet up. And also my previous experiences of working as a dramaturg, I was invited by the theatre makers in, they knew me, we had a previous relationship. So it was really interesting to navigate our terms of agreement, as was mentioned previously, with all different groups, because they were extremely different for 4 different groups. First of all, as Orla McGovern asked me, what is this dark art of dramaturgy? What are you going to do? And then I was, what do you want me to do? We were not familiar with each other's work, so it was our early meetings were a real interesting kind of trying to focus in on what they wanted from me and for me to understand what they wanted to create, what their intentions were. And that's a very strong note. I worked with Pamela. That was one of her very strong notes, to zone in on their intention for the piece. And I hold that space and keep kind of, while they get, carried away in the dynamic of what's happening, that I have that one step remove to just that level of objectivity. So most of my projects, and I'm enjoying this, are long-term projects. They're not for this year's festival, they're for next year's festival.
Yeah.
So it's very much the generative stage, it's very much the blank page. And I'm really loving that. Like, I'll be working with these groups off into the summer and beyond, probably. So I just, like, I've always been a fan of the Galway Theatre Festival, but I think this is an incredible opportunity for emerging artists to be given this by the festival, this person at the end of the Zoom to listen to their ideas and to talk to them on into the future about how they might develop them. Like, I know that a lot of writers kind of have great ideas and then they kind of don't know where to go with them, or they don't have people to discuss them with, and they don't flourish and grow. So at this generative stage, I see my role with these groups as being a support, or being somebody who gives them deadlines over a longer period.
Yeah, great. And so, as you mentioned, some of your projects are more long-term, but do you have something that you'd like to pinpoint in the festival program?
I'm so excited to see Shakes. I can't wait because when I started working with this group, it was already kind of so well developed, so on the road. There was so much energy, so much excitement. Kevin Murphy is the writer director, and it was just like, hang on tight to this fast moving machine. And it's a really strong story about addiction, and there's lots of different elements to it, and I'm dying to see that one.
Great, good. So that's a great recommendation. Thank you very much, Marina. And last but by no means least, we come to Claire Mullane. And Claire, you were really one of the core originators of this project as the Festival Dramaturg in 2019. So we started with Claire working with, was it 3 work in progresses in 2019? And now look what has come out of that early collaboration. So I suppose, as you're the OG festival dramaturg, what have you found over it since 2019 and to now has really stood to this test of time and stood the test of practice? And how have you found that maybe developing a little bit through being involved in the expanded project?
I suppose it's kind of flexing that dramaturgy muscle. It's a brilliant opportunity with the festival, like Marina touched on and a few other people have said, where you get, you're given these projects and they're people you've never worked with before, and very, very different types of projects. And so you have to figure out how to approach each of them, how you can best support the project, kind of different styles of working with different people. And so each project is a great opportunity to just flex that muscle and keep practicing those dramaturgy skills. And each project I've worked on, I've certainly learned something and, an experience that I can bring in then to the next project, be it particular questions that are really helpful. A little bit like Pamela mentioned, those initial questions that you can keep coming back to, like to try to keep the focus, because it's so easy in the development of something to kind of go off in an excited tangent. And, this thing seems really exciting and you go on and actually to bring it back and go, hang on, what are we trying to say with the project? What is the intention? What do we want the audience to take away? And just, just training that muscle, just to constantly just to have to practice the practice of dramaturgy. And I think, having this opportunity this year with the program, having a mentor has been brilliant. Just, having a supportive sounding board to just discuss the ongoing development of each project, and just have somebody else to confirm you're not going completely off on one or going completely mad. But yeah, the opportunity to work on loads of different projects means, for example, this year, one of the projects I'm working on is a dance theatre piece. So the source material is a musical score. So it's kind of taking the dramaturgy skills and taking the kind of skills that I'd usually use to investigate a text, and using those skills to investigate a musical score, and picking up the clues that are in the score and finding the opportunities and things that can inform the performance. So that's been really great. All those new little challenges are very exciting. So yeah, that's been great fun.
Great. And you mentioned something with a musical score. Would that be your highlight, or is there something else you'd pick?
Well, I'm going to be very
all to the test now, because I know myself, obviously I'm biased, but there's loads of things I'd like to tell.
I'm going to be very cheeky and very unbiased, and I'm going to talk about the two projects that I'm working on that are programmed at this year's festival. So the one I just mentioned with the musical score, it's called Embodying Glass. It's 15 minutes and it's free, and it's just an invitation to kind of lose yourself in this beautiful, almost meditative music, but with a really dynamic and really visceral embodiment by Jeremy Sir Cook. So it's the Contempo Quartet, who are the resident ensemble with Galway Music Residency. They're playing Philip Glass's score Company, which is actually itself inspired by a short story of the same name by Samuel Beckett. So there's interesting layers within that project. And then the second one that I'm going to cheekily sneak in is Borders. It's a work in progress project. It's Oisin Robbins of Beluga Theatre is working with international collaborators. Heyman, I'm going to cheat and check my notes. Heyman Han and Bright Ong, and it's a project for young audiences, so it's 8+. So if anybody has any children 8+, it would be great to come along. And as it's a work in progress, it's great just for them to get a bit of feedback, particularly from children, but also from anyone interested in theatre for young audiences, just to kind of help them on the ongoing development of their project as it progresses.
So in some ways, we're giving people a chance to try their hand at a bit of dramaturgy in the moment with the work in progress feedback. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Exactly.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you. I would listen to you all talk about your practice all night if I could. I find it really interesting, and you've all been really generous with your insights into how you work and what dramaturgy means to you and to your practice. We're now going to open. We have a few minutes for some questions. So if anybody has a question, pop it into the chat box there, and we'd be happy to pose your question to whoever of the panel is it's appropriate to. Oh, so Mairead Folan of No Ropes Theatre. Mairead, I think you should be able to unmute yourself there, or else we can do it for you. Here we go. Allowed to talk.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So my question, I don't know who my question is to, but so a lot of the conversation in the past 12, 13 months has been on diversity within the theatre sector. So how do you guys see that will happen in terms of dramaturgs, especially new dramaturgs coming into the sector, and in dramaturg, especially in terms of presentation dramaturg, how do you see that fit into productions? For example, say that there's a Spanish character, a disabled character played by an actor that's not Spanish or disabled. Like, how are you going to make that more diverse? That's the end of my question. If you want to be to me again.
Well, yeah, great question. And it's certainly, I mean, so great question. I might take just a little bit of that. So I guess, you know, Fishamble's track record working with, often work with partners like Arts and Disability Ireland, Prave Point, so we've worked with writers like Rosalind McDonough. So I'll give you an actual example with the writer Rosalind McDonough, who's a member of the traveller community and a wheelchair user and is a writer. Some of it comes down to physicality. You have to have spaces which are accessible, you know, and that is not actually as universal as you might think. And then I've also worked with John Connors from the traveller community. And sometimes, so with casting of mainstream, it was very important to Fishamble to have a cast that's involved members of the traveller community and members of people with disabilities. So we weren't, interesting in that one, we didn't cast one for one, we cast an ensemble of actors, performers from the traveller community, disability community, and I know the walkie-talkie community, as Rosalind referred to, i.e. people without disability, you know. So we got the group together that way. One of the plays I'll be looking at on Monday is What I Don't Know About Autism by Jodie O'Neill, who herself is an autistic writer, and very, very interesting, diverse cast bringing together. And you then into a very interesting area of the kind of performance drama, and who is the audience again? Are we assuming who the audience are or not, or how is that working as well? So you really do think about the way things are structured and the way things communicate. So they're all really good questions. I'll do one more thought. So Fishamble, there are not that many plays. There are some, there are definitely some, but not many plays by writers from the Black community, from the migrant community, ethnic minorities and persons of colour. That was the group we looked at. And there's an element, to be honest, of see it to be it. If people aren't seen to be there on the stage or writing or working on shows, then people assume it's sort of not for them. So we ran a workshop with Felicia Olasanya, known as Feli Speaks. And that was interesting as well, because again, really crudely, you don't necessarily want to go, here's this group of people who want to speak, have a voice, they wish to perform, wish to create work, and go, and now here's Arthur Miller. To my left, I have Arthur Miller, the playwright, and let's try and get your voice into the structure of that, or, you know, that kind of thing. I didn't actually have Arthur Miller. He's in a coffin to my left. No, but, you know, so you're going, okay, how do we tease out new forms, new structures, new ways of speaking, which are right and fit the voice and come from the creative impulse of the people who wish to speak, but in a way that, you know, you do offer a certain expertise. So you don't just say whatever you do is great. You go, okay, we're doing it this way. This is how we're working. Okay, well, here's some ideas to help get this voice onto the stages. So sorry for the ramble there, but the short answer is you think about it all the time, but it's also very interesting. And each particular case needs to be worked out for itself, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I'll hop in there, will I? So I think for me, where I start first is my own practice. So where is diversity and inclusion in my own practice? And I suppose I've sort of asked myself that for a couple of years now. So when I was, I guess where it started for me was when I was at the New Theatre. We had this yearly new writing week where we do readings. So I brought in colourblind casting into that. A little bit about this thing about see it to be it, because one of the things, there's kind of an unvirtuous circle in this. I've often heard people say, well, how can you produce the work if you can't get people to play the work? Do you know what I mean? So, I mean, that was one of the reasons why we started with that, in terms of actors of colour would then be working with us from the beginning. So anyone who wants to write characters of colour knows there are actors of colour. So you're sort of trying to create the virtuous circle and break the unvirtuous one, in a sense, if you see what I mean. So yeah, so you look at it in different aspects of your practice. And then for me, I was really aware that I hadn't worked with any writers. Going back a few years ago, I hadn't worked in Ireland. I had a practice in the UK before I moved back to Ireland, but in Ireland, I hadn't worked with any writers of disability. So I then was approached by somebody who was an autistic writer. Would I consider working with them? And I said, yes, I would. But also it allowed me to sort of expand that. So that person was Roderick Ford, who I continue to work with now. And we went on to do a mentorship through Arts Disability Ireland, then became a play called The Spider's House, which went on at Project Arts Centre at January of 2020, I think, if I remember correctly.
The last play. The last play.
It's last play, really great play.
One of the last plays to go on before COVID. And then what was great for me with that, and I say me very actively, is because then it allowed me to continue to develop my relationship with Arts Disability Ireland. So I've then gone on to had the pleasure of working with several artists, playwrights with disability, including, say, a Galway writer, David Joyce, and Emily Gilmore Murphy more recently, and she'll be doing actually a talk on the 4th of May about our mentorship we did together for ADI, because the deadline for that is upcoming. And I think one thing that I would say about that is it's great then to sort of create visibility, if you can, around the work, and then more people kind of come to you, and then it's not even saying for me to work with them, but also for me to connect them to other people within the industry. So that's part of the kind of networking it in. So yeah, so I suppose it's sort of where I would now, in a sense, be looking at the wider ecology and sort of asking questions about where do we all go from here in terms of diversity and inclusion. And for me, what that has meant is that I've gone off, and I'm very fortunate to say this, and received bursaries from Dublin City Council and the Arts Council this year to work with people internationally to learn about best practice in these areas. So I'm currently on a mentorship with a chap called Jonathan Meth, who runs a festival called Crossing the Lines, which folk in Galway might know because it was due to be part of the festival, with Blue Teapot. It's a consortium across Europe of the foremost practitioners of companies of artists of intellectual disability. And I'm also working with a thing called the International Dramaturgs Lab, and our section includes a playwright called Katie O'Reilly, a Birmingham Irish English extraordinary playwright who is a person of disability but also writes and has written for many years about disability as a topic within her work. So I'm trying to learn kind of from international best practice to see what can be useful for us here in Ireland. I hope that sort of didn't ramble too much and sort of answer.
No, that's really interesting, but from both of you there, and I'd love to, you know, check back in with you, Pamela, and hear what comes out of that kind of best practice learning and what you kind of dig up in your learnings with all of those people. We've two questions that we might go to quickly, so we'll move a step away from that topic for a second. We've a question for everyone here in the Q&A, which is, Davey mentioned being a theatre director. I'm curious to hear what was it that drew everyone towards dramaturgy as a profession or a role? Davey, do you want to take that one off first?
Oh, I thought I'd already said that. So I guess it's that I think there's a certain freedom that dramaturgy affords you, in that you have no, don't misunderstand me, your investment in the piece is less personal sometimes. You have less ego tied into the piece sometimes if you're not directly tied into the making of it. And I think that can be a very freeing position to take. And that's certainly one that I've enjoyed, where you can sort of sit back and look at the piece as it exists in its own context and out of the context of your own creative practice as a maker. And so I found that contrast has been very refreshing for me, that I've been able to sort of take a step out of myself and offer myself as a resource to another project. I found that very rewarding.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, if I go into that in a different way, so with Fishamble in the 1990s, we began being increasingly successful in presenting and touring work. And it was very interesting what Pam was saying about unvirtuous circles. In life, if you create virtuous circles, so things simply go on in a good way, that's a good thing. Like, and you keep knocking forward. So the more we toured, the more people sent us plays. So somebody needs to read the plays, and I was that somebody. And then what I discovered was people submit plays to companies like us, to the Abbey, to Druid, and so on. And the frustrating thing is many of them are really good. That's the frustrating thing. If the comedy value was they're all terrible and you could just dismiss them and be fine, but no, they're actually really good. But then incomplete for some reason. They were sort of like, gave us an excuse not to produce them, because you could go, oh, this is really good, but if have a think about this. So the original, I suppose, development of the Fishamble courses came out of a frustration that the level of the plays were getting to us. If only people had a chance to have a course, have a thing, to have a workshop on something, then maybe the script would have been a better place for then it to be to get into production. So for me, the working with playwrights dramaturgy came out of the needs of Fishamble and the response to that work.
Great, that's really interesting. Thank you.
It's I know there's quite a few people, isn't there, who are kind of students and stuff who are probably watching and involved in the festival. So actually, funny enough, my dramaturgy starts back actually then in college. I had this odd combination in my undergraduate. I did English and I majored in drama. So I had this kind of literary approach, you know, to, you know, dramaturgy and playwriting. But I was also the production manager of Drumsock and UCD. And I was banished ar Horak a festival dacha ag den dramos gairiga freshen, you know. And so I had this, like, I went around with a scale rule and a script in my hand, right? And so it became this thing where it was both incredibly practical and abstract literary at the same time. And somehow those two things kept merging as I went forward and I went out. And so like many people coming out of college, I had a theatre company. We put on new plays, you know, it was called Green Light Productions, if anyone can remember back that far. But to kind of fund that, I was a stage manager. That was my paying job. And that was because I had this practical skill set. And I ended up perennially in new writing rooms. And so my practice ended up focusing down into being a stage manager. I did a few shows with Fishamble back in the day, actually, but also working a lot in the Peacock Theatre, and then doing some work as well for the literary department in the Abbey. So this continued, this dichotomy of being down on the stage and then up covering bits and pieces, being on the script reading panel, for example, in the Abbey, while also, you know, doing a bit of cover for, you know, the literary department. So eventually it came to this point for me where it was like partly about making a choice, but it was also about, I realized the place where I was most fascinated, useful, engaged was right in that first 2 weeks of the rehearsal room, when it was the discussion, the making or breaking of the thing, in a sense. And also, I have to be honest, it was my greatest frustration, which is kind of not a million miles from what you're talking about, Gavin, because we were always, almost every company and place I worked on, we were always a week too short. And if we if the script had been that bit readier, we wouldn't have been a week too short.
The economics come into
and
it.
A master's in dramaturgy arrived.
At the risk of going back to the earlier question, Rosalind McDonough, you know, made a great point. Show me the money. A lot of this is to do with funding in terms of arts and diversity. This is to do with policy documents at government, arts council, festival level. It's all about this, and it's all about the resources that are put into making those things happen. And certainly equally with rehearsals, because we have this system that we have a relatively short rehearsal time. It costs money to do that. You're always hoping that it'll work out, but you're taking the risk on a 3-week forward rehearsal that maybe it won't. Exactly what you're saying, Pamela. So, I mean, in terms of like, this sounds so naive, but it was 2004 before Fishamble was able to pay for a day's development 3 months before rehearsal began. So to literally go, let's get actors in a room 3 months ahead of rehearsal periods where we can sit around the table, read the script and give the writer 3 months to change the play rather than 3 weeks. And it's so obvious now, but those things came in, you know, as well. And that becomes a model. That becomes a model that people go, okay, let's do a series of readings for plays prior to rehearsals. But yeah, I mean, back in the 90s, you were turning up day one, Monday morning, going, right, here we go. Yeah.
Seat of the pants.
Great. I'd love to hear from our 3 festival dramaturgs briefly, if you don't mind, about what it is that drew you to dramaturgy, please. Marina.
Well, I like Pamela and everybody else, left college in a drama company in the Fauna that we just set up, and in one way or another have been involved with theatre all along. So people that I know often have been sending me scripts all along, and I just write notes in response. You know, friends, mostly people I know, and then that evolved into people I know having money to make a play, and so they would ask me to pay me to work with them in that capacity. But it's only in recent years that has started to happen. I enjoy it an awful lot. The exposure to the creative process with the step removed that Davey described is kind of intoxicating.
Great, thank you. Sarah?
Well, I've worked for years and years and years in directing and arts administrating, and in North America, in the US, where dramaturgy is not really a thing. It's literary reviewing, if it's anything. That's not true everywhere, but where I was anyway. So coming to Europe, part of the reason to come to Europe to do my master's and then my PhD was to bring the same skills, those directorial skills, into a space where devising and embodied performance and participation were more recognized forms. So for me, it actually comes from my research. I've been thinking more and more about how we dramaturg the audience, how we lead the audience on a journey. So understanding the principles of dramaturgy led me into this and teaching that class and other classes at NUA Galway, which really felt like, I'm still figuring this out, but it feels like a really good position to be in. It combines the teacher and the director. And I really like that.
Great. And so the last words then to our festival dramaturg, Claire Mullane.
No pressure. So I did a BA in Drama and Theatre Studies in UCC. I then moved to London and I kind of fell into a job working as a stage techntechnician at the National Theatre. And I then moved through that into the stage management department. I was working as ASM and then stage managing some new shows that were happening in the NT studio, which was fascinating. And I knew that I wanted to be more involved in the creation. So I started working as a director on lots of new short play festivals in London. A pivotal one being Theatre 503. They do these rapid right response shows where people go to see a show and then writers have, I can't even remember how long, but they basically write a short play inspired by one of the Theatre 503 main productions. So I was assigned as a director on one of those, and because it was that like really quick new writing piece, I was thrown in with the writer I didn't know, and we were essentially developing the play together to get it really quickly up onto its feet. And after that, there was loads of different opportunities to kind of, really the most opportunities to direct was these kind of new play festivals. So I was working on loads of short new plays like that. And ultimately then I ended up directing a new play for Theatre 503, which was actually a full-length play that one of the Theatre 503 rapid right response artists had written. And so through that, I just realized that I really enjoyed working on new writing, and I really enjoyed developing a script with a writer and asking these questions and just shaping it and refining. And I loved that process of getting from something that there's something special there, but trying to dig down till, you know, there's this kind of jewel emerges, hopefully. And then, so yeah, I've kind of come through it through directing. I'm still directing, but I moved to Galway then, and I've been doing freelance literary work with Druid and the Abbey, and just constantly kind of using that muscle. So then for me, Galway Theatre Festival came along, and it was the first time I got to officially be a dramaturg rather than a director working with a writer. And that's been brilliant, because taking away that extra responsibility of directing the piece, and as Davey said, that whole ego investment, which is, again, like you said, it's not that you're not invested when you're a dramaturg, but that ego bit and the kind of pressure that I have to make all these decisions and stage it, without all of that, to just completely invest in the actual dramaturgy, and if it's a script-based thing in the script, or if it's devised, you know, trying to piece together what's coming out of the room. And so yeah, that's been my journey. Sorry, long-winded journey.
No, that's great. And what I love is this idea of digging down until you uncover a jewel, which I think is a nice image to end this really interesting panel on. Thank you so much for as I said, your generosity with your experience and with your ideas. And thank you to our attendees for joining us. And I suppose really now all that remains to say is the festival is launched and the festival awaits. So we hope to see you again over the next 9 days.
Thank you very much. It's great. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Circa and GTF and everyone.